So she's feeding information to the DEA while sleeping with the handler's supervisor, which is why the Meech camp is saying, hold on a second, the information she fed was insulating her lover, who was kicking her a couple hundred G's of government money. So like I said, improper financial relationship with an informant, improper sexual relationship.
So essentially this whole thing could be fabricated because he needed an excuse to keep paying her because he liked whatever he was getting on those business deals.
But when the agent is driving, they're able to manipulate the investigations.
Right.
So one of the tricks he did is he had her feeding information to other agents in Atlanta. Then information was fed to St. Louis, and the St. Louis agents independently corroborated the information that came from Atlanta, but it's all originating from Cromer.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. Pete, thank you for joining us again, my friend. Now, we've got an interesting topic to discuss today. You know, we've just discussed a lot of the factors of your life, your experiences involved in the trafficking and dealing with the cartels and things of that nature. And you've done 26 years total in time, 23 years of that in prison, and you're very versed in law work. You helped a lot of other people with law work in prison. And that's not uncommon. You know, a lot of people gravitate towards that because you ain't really got a whole lot of you've got nothing but free time. So why not use that time to help better yourself and work on your case if at all possible? And sure. I think you are going to be able to break this down quite well because there's some big news in the hip hop world. Big Meech has recently kind of been feuding with 50 Cent.
Okay.
He posed in a picture with Rick Ross, and which anybody that knows that historic beef there, they're not friends whatsoever. 50 and Rick hate each other. And 50 began calling Meech a rat. And people were thinking it was just because he was dealing with Rick Ross, and which even convolutes this even further is that 50 Cent has a TV show on Stars called BMF, who the main character that plays Meech is Meech's own son. So now he's completely saying Meech is a rat, but we're hearing other things coming out where this could have some validity to it about Meech doing some third-party cooperation, if you will. So let's take this. We'll start, lay a little bit of groundwork, Big Meech, BMF, what happened, and then kind of work our way forward to what's going on right now in the news.
Well, obviously Big Meech had a very prominent case in, 25 years ago, essentially. Right. They were significant within the African-American trafficking space. And Big Meech more so than the other guys, simply because he had associations with prominent hip hop figures in Atlanta. So he had like some sense of notoriety and some sense of celebrity. Now I've pulled all the documents from the case from the gentleman out of St. Louis who's claiming that Big Meech had got him into a jackpot. And from the public record, there's nothing publicly available that indicates Big Meech was complicit in setting this guy up. I put it this way, I don't know either, man. And so, I'm just calling it like I see it.
The guy from St. Louis you're referring, that's the one that goes by Cuffy?
Yes, he's the guy that goes by Cuffy.
Okay.
And now that doesn't mean Cuffy's not being factually accurate, because a lot of times those type of proceedings will be held under seal. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, as a baseline, there's nothing publicly available to independently support Cuffy's statements that he's been making, via phone calls onto TikTok, essentially. Mm-hmm. Now, the circumstances, on the other hand, tend to support that something may have been amiss. It's not necessarily involving Meech. We know for a fact that when Meech was indicted in 2005, he was being held in pretrial custody in Detroit. He developed a relationship, some kind of an association or friendship. Guys stuck in prison, they get to bullshitting, with a Hispanic gentleman named Fidel Suarez, who was out of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. So I go and I pull all the papers on Suarez's case, and people keep calling Suarez cartel. We've had episodes earlier. Look, cartel guys don't deal with Americans. They don't deal with African Americans. They don't do business that way. The wholesale customer for the cartel guys are other Mexican nationals. Now, those Mexican nationals, understand, most of the Mexican nationals don't speak English. Meech doesn't speak Spanish, so they're not doing business together. This guy Cuffy, he's talking to someone who's a customer of a customer. So he's at least 2, if not 3 degrees of separation away from an actual cartel operative. And so when you hear them saying, well, this is a cartel case, no. It's just a Mexican who, knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who might be cartel. And the reason why this is important is because Cuffy's allegation is that Meech was trying to set up Suarez, not Cuffy. Well, that doesn't necessarily make sense, because in order for Meech to have been able to set up Suarez, see, when Meech fell was 2005, he became acquainted with Suarez in 2005. Suarez went to trial in 2006. Suarez was acquitted. So then he went home. So when these events happened 6 years later in 2012, well, how's Meech reaching out to some guy he hasn't spoken with in 6 years?
Yeah.
Now, the allegation is that Meech was going through a woman named Tammy Cowins, who has no involvement in drug trafficking. She's an American, no drug trafficking or no trafficking experience, no criminal experience. And she's the one who is now supposedly working as an operative for the DEA, which is certainly plausible, but it's not credible that a Mexican or Mexican-American trafficker in California would have accepted an invitation from her to get involved in business with her.
Right. Do you know the dynamic between her and Meech? I've heard reports that she is like his handler, was his person on the street. She handles like the BMF brand. If I'm not mistaken, she's a co-producer on the BMF show.
She received an executive producer credit. And you have to understand, when you're in federal prison, you're not allowed to own you're not allowed to manage a business. If you owned it beforehand, you can maintain ownership, but you can't run it. If you're in prison, you can't start a new business venture. You can't execute contracts. And so there was obviously an individual in his circumstance with a lot of interest. Like when I was incarcerated, I was contacted by several production companies wanting to do documentaries, wanting to do films. Well, I'm not in a position to facilitate that.
Right.
And so for me, like I had a woman I'd known since high school, known her for 40 years. You trust her. So boom, I have her speaking with them on my behalf. That way they can maintain with going forward on the projects without you getting in a jackpot because they're saying you're trying to run a business from prison.
I got you.
And so what Meech did is he had executed a document which transferred his life rights and creative control of his story to Miss Cowins.
Okay.
She's the one who's circulating it in Hollywood. See, anybody can write a story. I can write a story about you. As long as it's not false or defamatory or libelous, anybody can write it. There's been 100 books written on Chapo.
Yeah.
100 books written on John Gotti Sr. They didn't authorize any of these. However, there have been instances where film production companies, they appreciate when the life rights are attached to a project because it means that you're going to obtain the cooperation of the subject, the individual whose story it is, and you're not going to have to deal with any lawsuits later on. Like this is what happened with how I started becoming really good friends with Matt when we were in prison, because Matt had written the memoir for a prisoner named Ephraim Deveroli, who was later on the subject, the protagonist in the movie War Dogs.
Right.
That was the character played by Jonah Hill.
Right.
Well, the Warner Brothers actually bought the rights to Deveroli's business partner's story, David Packhouse, which was played by Miles Teller. Mm-hmm. So they're telling the story about Deveroli through Packhouse. Well, Deveroli didn't get compensated, so now he has to sue Warner Brothers. Matt, as the author of the memoir, he has to sue Warner. So there's this whole huge story, which in and of itself has been turned into a story. And the documentaries that, this document is getting made. This same story is being made into another documentary. However, because she was able to represent, not only was she in possession of the story for Big Meech, but she also had the life rights attached to the project. Commercially, that is a much more viable option. There are thousands of manuscripts circulating around Hollywood. Maybe a few hundred movies get made a year.
Right.
Those that are going to the path of least resistance is the one they're going to take.
Right.
And so she was that lawful agent working on his behalf, facilitating interest in the film project. Now, apparently she was involved with this guy Cuffy for a 2-year period, but it had nothing to do with anything illegal. Cuffy claims that he was the one who put up the money to have the manuscript written. Very possible. Matt wrote the manuscript that was being pitched in my case.
Right.
Someone has to write it. She didn't write it. Cuffy's saying he put up the money. So they had a legitimate relationship. Now, Meech is relying on her. Cuffy is relying on her. These guys are just both, they're both like me. We're just traffickers. We're not dealing with Hollywood producers. You got to have somebody reputable and responsible and respectable out front. That was her role.
Right.
And so during the course of this dynamic between Cuffy and her, she independently was already in a speaking conversation type of relationship with this guy Suarez. Now, Cuffy is saying that Meech was having her try to set up Suarez, which, like I said, I can't deny that. We don't know whether it's true or not. He says, Cuffy says that she said that in the sealed hearing. Well, those transcripts are not publicly available. Assuming Cuffy's telling the truth, that was a pretty weak plan because Mexican nationals are not going to be dealing with American women.
Yeah.
Much less, they don't deal with Americans, much less American women. I mean, come on. And so that didn't come to fruition. So she had this informant relationship with the DEA while allegedly targeting Suarez on behalf of Meech. Now, during the course of this informant relationship, she becomes involved romantically with the supervisory special agent over the task force.
That's Keith Cromer.
That's Mr. Cromer, yes. So now Keith Cromer and her he's cheating on his wife with his mistress informant. So in and of itself, that's going to jeopardize everything that they got going on with respect to the investigation. On top of that, he's the one authorizing payments to her. So she ends up receiving like $200,000 as an informant, where he's the one who signed it off. Well, so now he's maintaining an improper financial relationship with an informant, whom he's also maintaining an improper sexual relationship with. Like nothing good's going to come.
Except a lot of wasted money, or not wasted, but a lot of, at that point, it's damn near embezzlement because he's got to know that. He's got to know if this comes out to light, not only is he going to be in trouble for sleeping with an informant, but then, I mean, like, correct me if I'm wrong, you would know more than me, but you're not going to keep getting these payments as an informant if you're not giving something up in return, I would think. That's
Meech's defense. Because Cromer had to provide a basis. See, later on, this all comes to light. So there's the federal government's Department of Justice's Internal Affairs is called the Office of Professional Responsibility. So there's an OPR investigation targeting Cromer for this alleged misconduct. Well, separately, now you've got an Office of Inspector General criminal investigation. This is criminal misconduct.
Right.
Cromer gets charged, forget just losing your job, you're losing your pension and going to prison. And every case that Cromer was previously involved in potentially now can be reopened. This is what happened with the Whitey Bulger circumstance when Bulger and his partner were disclosed as having been cooperating.
Right.
You get 15 guys that were in prison for over a decade get back into court. Guys were getting out of life sentences, 25-year sentences. Whenever there's criminal misconduct involving an agent, the government does everything possible to keep a lid on it. Because not only does it impact the case it's on now, it's going to impact every other case this guy was previously involved in. And so Cromer's circumstance is what creates the plausible deniability. Like it may very well be all BS. Blaming Meech. Again, I'm not saying Cuffy's lying. That may have happened in the hearing. But on its face, it's plausible only because Cromer had to now come in and say, hey, I was giving her all these payments because she was giving us actionable intelligence. Okay, well, what's the targets of the investigation? Oh, this guy, Big Meech. See, Cromer knew that she was in contact with Meech. Therefore, he can say, well, she's doing work on his behalf. Well, they're doing legal work with respect to pitching the manuscript in Hollywood.
Right. It's got nothing to do with actually giving up people related to the drug game.
Yes. And so, and that's correct. And so now, it may very well be, it may very well be that it was just bad timing for Cuff. Because if she was trying to set Cuffy up, she could have done that at any time during the 2-year period where they were working on the manuscript. He was clearly never the target. Like, at best, this guy Suarez may have been the target. That was never going to happen, but they didn't understand cartel dynamics. So this guy Cuffy may have just walked himself into a circumstance. And when I read the papers, it indicates that Cuffy was involved in a conversation with her while she was spending personal time with the agent.
Right. And there's a clip that you sent me, and I'm going to throw a little insert in here where Cuffy says that he's almost kind of confusing the way he said it, because I had to rewind it back and listen to him again. He goes, this guy that I've known for 32 years, I haven't spoken with him since 2013.
We sent Big Meech certified mail. Big Meech set me up, and Tammy set me up with the sting in 2013. That's the last time I've heard from this nigga. We sent them correspondence through the attorneys. Asked him, is he aware that his name is in court sworn documents and sending me a truckload of cocaine? He never responded. We know he got the mail because we sent everything certified. I have not heard from this nigga of 32 years since they set me up in 2013.
Well, I was like, well, that math don't math. But I think the way he was wording it is he knew him for 32 years, which is possible. Yeah, knew me. He says that he got jammed up on a coke. This is part of Tammy's testimony, that he got jammed up on a coke deal where they had sent a truckload of cocaine to his house is what he got jammed up on. But he actually got arrested. Didn't he get arrested prior to that?
No, see, he in August of 2012, Suarez allegedly sent product from Los Angeles to St. Louis. Okay. Independent. Now he didn't get charged for that.
Right.
This is the circumstance that Cromer is saying justifies all the financial payouts to his informant. We were working this case. See, I had a similar circumstance in my case where there was a 20-month investigation that didn't result in arrests. They ripped us off for the $2 million. So now the agents are scrambling to, well, we were working it the whole time, and at the last minute, it just fell apart. They have to, they don't go into it thinking it's going to be criminal misconduct. An opportunity presents itself. They ripped off the money and the drugs. They extorted a bribe, essentially. Well, they didn't know that opportunity was going to present. So now they got to go back and backtrack. Same thing with the circumstance with Cuffy. Now, she wasn't targeting Cuffy. At best, she was targeting Suarez.
Right.
Now, Suarez and Cuffy were dealing with each other. The truckload of coke, the truck carrying the product shows up in St. Louis. That's not he doesn't get arrested with that. That truck doesn't get seized. That product doesn't get taken down. What happens is 6 months later in early 2013, Cuffy contacts Tammy Cowins. Tammy Cowins puts him in contact with another informant, some guy they call CS2. They never identified his name publicly.
Right, because Tammy is actually CS1, which is confidential source 1, I think is how they have it worded in the indictment.
She's confidential source 1. Unknown named informant is confidential source 2. Cuffy gets placed in contact with confidential source 2. Confidential source 2 introduces Cuffy to his contact, which is undercover special agent Martinez. See, that's what, again, you see, like a lot of the African-American guys don't understand that you're not meeting a cartel guy.
Yeah.
And just because the guy's Mexican-American don't make him cartel.
He's still a few rungs off the ladder from the cartel, even if it is a straight up guy.
Yeah, because they use citizenship to filter out law enforcement.
Right.
LAPD is half Mexican-American. You can't rely on the fact he's Latino. That means nothing in Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Los Angeles, Phoenix, the police are significantly large population of Mexican Americans. Well, he gets introduced to this guy, Martinez, who's claiming to be cartel. Cuffy, of course, an African American in St. Louis, he wouldn't know a cartel guy if he saw one.
Yeah.
So he gets into bed with this guy, Martinez. Now, what's interesting about the Martinez circumstance, Martinez provides Cuffy. First of all, Cuffy claims not to have the money to buy. Cuffy can't sell Martinez any product, and he claims not to have any money to buy product. Well, he says then that Martinez sends him a couple of kilos. Well, first of all, none of this makes any sense. If you don't have any money, why is this guy going to do business with you?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into business if you don't even have the upfront money to even make somewhat of a small, even if it's a small deal, that lets me know your finances ain't in order.
Right. For instance, on the case where they had the ripoff, that was $1.5 million in product. They wanted a $300,000 deposit. Okay, put a few $100,000 down. That way everybody knows everybody's being honest.
Right.
They're putting up the weight, you put up the deposit, the deposit money, no big deal. But in this circumstance, Cuffy doesn't put up any deposit. They send a quote unquote 2 kilos from Memphis to St. Louis. No deposit money. He doesn't have a vehicle to transport the product in. It's a DEA car with a hidden compartment. So it's I don't understand how they're calling this guy, St. Louis kingpin. None of this makes any sense. And you see, and here's part of the problem, I think, is that
so the car that it was coming back on was a DEA car?
Yeah, he didn't even have a vehicle to transport the vehicle in. So the DEA used a DEA car with a seized vehicle with hidden compartments. So Cuffy sends one of his minions to go pick up the vehicle to drive it back. The car gets pulled over because, of course, they know the product's in the car. They know where the hiding spot's is. So they knock off the driver and his buddy in the vehicle. They arrest these 2 guys. Now Martinez goes back to Cuffy and says, hey, man, you're on the hook for the $110,000 worth of product. And you got to pay back for the Cadillac Escalade that got knocked off. You owe me $170. Now, Cuffy doesn't have the money to pay the $170. None of this makes any sense. So what does the guy do? Martinez says, well, I'll give you 15 more keys of coke this time. And it's what the hell's going on here? This would never happen in the higher level trafficking community. No cartel guy would ever conduct his affairs this way. Now either it's one of 2 things. Either one, Cuffy was just some broke deck guy who couldn't put it together.
Right.
Or 2, he had the money and he wanted to work with other people's money. And so, you get a little bit of that get over mentality.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to pay for it. I'll use his product to pay him back. Come on, man. You don't got time for that bullshit.
Yeah.
That's how you know you're not dealing with major traffickers.
Yeah.
Because the charge that subjected him to the mandatory minimum was the second transaction, where now he's getting 15 keys from the Memphis undercover agent. He gets busted for that. So now he gets taken down on the 15 kilos for the coke, the 2 kilos on the opioids. Well, those had nothing to do with Suarez. So in the public perception, he got taken down for Suarez material. This had nothing to do with Suarez whatsoever. He got taken down by an undercover agent in Memphis who was pretending to be cartel guy.
So why do you think he's putting the emphasis that this is coming from Meech?
Well, according to Cuffy, he said that during the hearing, Tammy Cowins testified that she entered into a cooperation relationship with the DEA for the purposes of benefiting Meech.
Right.
And the original target, according to Cuffy, was this guy Suarez. It couldn't have been Cuffy because she could have knocked Cuffy off at any given time.
Right.
And so assuming Meech was involved, he was protecting Cuffy by insulating him. Now, assuming her testimony is correct, then it would be, assuming his characterization of her testimony is correct, then what she would have been doing was entering into a third-party cooperation agreement on Meech's behalf. And we did an earlier podcast episode where in the cartel space, Sinaloa has mastered the art of third-party cooperation.
Right.
The other group that have also mastered it are the Israelis. Both groups are very proficient at getting their men sentencing reductions by handing over people that are not part of their group. Now, for Meech, it's a little different because the African American trafficking community isn't very well structured. And so, in order for, assuming he was interested in doing something like this, he would need someone on the street to act on his behalf.
Yeah.
Now, of course, a man of that prominence, particularly within the hip hop space, he wouldn't want this to come back on him. So she would have to do the dirty work while insulating him. So
it's still, to me, if I'm in Meech's position, and I know that, obviously I'm in there, I'm not going anywhere for a while. That is very risky. And could Tammy have brokered some sort of deal, quote unquote, on Meech's behalf without him even knowing? Is that possible?
Yes, it's possible, but it's usually unlikely because the individual on the street is taking a risk. Mm-hmm. See, this was very prevalent up until about 2015, 16, 17. The third-party cooperation space. Now, we really didn't hear about it at the higher security level institutions. But when I finally got down to the low security level institution, like there's guys openly talking about, there was like websites. Like, the cartel guys there's an attorney in Los Angeles and an attorney in Houston that handled this. For the Israelis, there was an attorney in Beverly Hills that handled it. But for individuals that aren't part of those structures, there were literally websites you can go on, third-party cooperation, and your family can pay. So you could be in Meech's case, a black guy out of Detroit and pay for an attorney out of Miami who will give you like a menu. Well, for $50,000, we'll set up some small guy. You'll get 3 or 4 years off. For $150,000, we'll get you, knock you off some, significant guy, 7 years. Or, for $250, the platinum plan, essentially. They'll take down 2 or 3 guys for a whole network. And I'm just like, are you kidding? This is going on down here? Like, that's just wide open at the lower security level institutions. Well, that blew up in about 17 or 18 because there were attorneys out of Miami that were charged with running scam third-party cooperation sites. So families are paying the $50,000 or the $100,000, and then they're not producing. And the prisoner can't really say anything because what's he going to do? Go complain to the FBI that he's trying to flip?
Yeah. Hey, I couldn't rat. They ripped me off for trying to rat on somebody else.
Yes. And so ultimately it blew up. Some attorneys got prosecuted. And so after 17 or 18, it's my understanding that the Department of Justice changed the rules that third-party cooperation is still permitted, but there has to be a personal connection. So it can't be some guy on an attorney's payroll in Miami earning a sentence reduction for a guy out of Portland, Oregon he's never met.
Okay.
Which is why it works fine for the Mexican guys, because they'll just say, no, my cousin, my brother-in-law. There's always going to be a way to manufacture a personal connection.
But this allegedly took place in 2013. And also a caveat to that is, I think what I was reading or what I heard was that it was of Meech's request that if he went along with this, his name not be in any documents.
Yes. Well, that's another ambiguous statement from the public record. The agent represents that Meech had said, keep my name out of this.
Right. Out of that's important. Keep my name out of this.
He wasn't talking about, on the public record, he wasn't talking about cooperation. He's saying if Suarez and Cuffy are doing business together, keep my name out of that. He's already doing a 30-piece.
Right. He don't want any more. So
if Suarez gets knocked off with Cuffy, the fact that Meech hooked these 2 guys up together puts him in the middle of a conspiracy.
Yes.
And so his statement could easily have been, keep my name out of this, because he doesn't want to get charged. Now, according to Cuffy, in the closed testimony in the hearing, she said that she was acting on behalf of Meech, and she was doing it because he didn't want his name to be attached to the cooperation effort. Either scenario is plausible.
Well, too, he even says that I think they sent him some certified mail asking, did he know about this and all that? If I'm Meech and just say hypothetically that he did have something to do with it, he knew about it, I'm not responding back to that letter because that automatically implicates me in having something to do with it. So the fact that he did not respond to me doesn't show guilt. One, it shows smarts. I would not associate nor contact or communicate in any way, shape, or form.
Those are the kind of tactics prisoners do, thinking there's legal significance to them when it's an irrelevant fact.
Yeah.
No one in their reasonable mind is going to respond to that.
Yeah.
Most people, the TikTok crowd, may necessarily think, ooh, that's significant, and draw an inference that it somehow implicates Meech. But in reality, no, of course not. Meech was perfectly reasonable to ignore that. You're right.
Where do you land on this? Because I mean, there is slight arguments for both, but I got to be honest. You got to take a guy that's done, I forgot how many years he did total in prison, but it's a lot. Meech, 19 years. Terry got out, I think a year or so ago. He got out, I think, for health reasons. Yeah, so he got out slightly earlier. His brother South, who they call Southwest T. I mean, the man done a lot of time. Like, I don't really see, but I guess they're saying the point was if he did do this, hypothetically, if he did do it, and it was supposed to, result in some big arrest, I guess this is the part we can dive into now. The whole thing fell apart because of the relationship with Tammy and Keith Cromer. So once that became public news, then the entire thing fell apart. Anything that was supposed to, had it been actual, what happened, anything Big Meech would have benefited was then gone.
See, that's a flaw in the theory that's being publicly presented. So, like, if Tammy Cowins went to the DEA and said, hey, I'm here on behalf of Big Meech, and I'm going to do 1, 2, and 3 for his benefit. If the agent turns out to be dirty, that doesn't undermine his performance.
Right.
Cuffy was still charged. Why didn't he get his reduction?
Yeah.
If the government entered into an agreement with her to his benefit, you don't penalize the beneficiary for the misconduct an agent did outside the scope of his employment.
Yeah, because technically his information would have held up.
Would have resulted in the guilty.
If what he's saying is true, if he got him jammed up on this deal that he's referring to in 2013, if all that is accurate, then Meech should have gotten a sentence
reduction. He didn't. And if he didn't get the reduction, which he never did, then he'd have been filing a motion saying, hey, I got a due process right to have that contract enforced. Like Tammy, if the scenario as presented is true, Tammy was Meech's agent. The government entered into an agreement with her on his behalf. Well, he should have got a sentence reduction. The fact that he didn't get a sentence reduction actually undermines the claim that Meech was involved. Now, it would have undermined Tammy's right to any further financial compensation.
Right.
Because her practical usefulness as an informant ended when it turns out she was sleeping with the task force head. But that misconduct in no way was contemplated by Meech, unless Meech told her, hey, go seduce the agent.
Right. And then you're really blowing up your deal that you're trying to, if hypothetically, if he's really doing this, then you're self-sabotaging your own deal.
Yeah, look, it's still an open question over what happened. You asked which way do I lean? She was doing it for a reason. We haven't discerned yet publicly what the reason is. I understand she's going to be producing or participating in a documentary with 50 Cent.
Yeah, now he's that whole thing is kind of taking a life of its own. 50 Cent released a screenshot of Lil Meech, Big Meech's son, where he was saying, "Hey man, we're cool. I'm hearing all these things. Ross just gave my pop some money so he could, keep his head up until season 3 starts." And then 50 Cent's response is, "What season 3?" He used a couple other words I'm not going to repeat, but what season 3? So seemingly on the surface, he's done with BMF. He's now saying that he's going to do something with Tammy. And what has also been floating around the rumor mill, if you will, and I'll preface this with rumors, is that Meech is trying to take back over whatever deal they cut while he was in prison to handle his affairs. He's trying to take back ownership. She's not wanting to give it up. And allegedly that is one of the things that she kind of helped conspire to damage his credibility, because he's trying to take back the BMF brand, I guess, if you will.
Yeah, well, she has a bias at this point,
right,
to harm him, so that she can keep control of the life.
And what better way to harm someone that I think before all this came about, if you said, "Show me a man that is the epitome of keep your mouth shut, do your time, loyalty," all that stuff that he says, it would be Big Meech.
Sure. And look, if Meech is not going to be able to participate in any project going forward, the only way she could capitalize on possessing the life rights would be doing a documentary with 50 Cent.
Because he's going to pay her.
Yes. And here's the thing is, we don't know what the nature of the agreement is between 50 Cent and her, because she's an executive producer on the BMF program on Stars or whatever.
Right.
Well, did 50 Cent buy the life rights from her? Does he control that intellectual property now? Because if he's got the manuscript with the rights attached to it, Meech can't do anything with his story.
Yeah. And that's something 50 would do, man. He's been known to pull shenanigans like that. I mean, he's made Ja Rule's life hell. I don't know if you heard that one time he bought every ticket to a Ja Rule concert and just went and sat up front. I mean, he is like the ultimate troll. And when you get on his bad side, he has the unlimited amount of financial resources now with his, catastrophic rise in that industry with the Power Series and everything that he's really put his hands on has turned to gold. He can do things like that. And that would be the inevitable FU move to Meech, which it seems like that's where he's at, to get in touch with Tammy if she's got his life rights.
Well, if you're interested in that particular storyline, 50 Cent's receiving a tremendous amount of promotional notoriety for essentially zero.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a very astute businessman.
Very. And he uses social media better than anyone.
Yeah, so he's just dribbling out a little bit. Like I heard the video, the clip of him talking to Tammy. That's why, like I'm saying, look, usually where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah.
Like she was motivated to approach the DEA for whatever reason. Now, it may have been that she was in love with Meech and she's going to do whatever it takes to get her man out of prison. Very likely. Possible. Or she was acting at his behest. Equally possible. Like, we don't know exactly what the circumstances are. And it's essentially a he said, she said, and she has an incentive to smear him. And so, the people who know are actually the DEA. You can't rely on Cromer because he's the one who had to scramble to come up with the justification, because when you start cutting checks for a couple hundred G's, she's not producing. Like, where are the cases? Like, they're well within their rights to obviously compensate their informants.
Right.
But for it to go on for an extended period, she was on a monthly payout. Well, monthly payouts are people that are continuously producing leads.
Yeah. That's almost an undercover operation at that point.
It certainly is. And so now the only person that she was having continuous conversations with were Meech. So now Cromer has an incentive to throw Meech into the mix.
Whether he was really in the mix or not.
Yes, because he could provide a plausible basis to say, well, this is why she got the 200 G's. We were actually targeting the head of the BMF. Meanwhile, Meech is in prison calling this chick saying, hey, what's going on with the project?
Yeah, he's strictly going on for another. It's almost like, have you ever seen the film Carlito's Way? So it's got Al Pacino in it. It's one of his earlier films. And Sean Penn, he's a young Sean Penn in there. He's his lawyer. He gets him out of prison. Well, he's trying to go straight, and leaving that life is hard. But he meets up with the FBI, and they're like, they play him a tape of his lawyer saying, "Well, I heard he's dealing again. I'll try to help you guys put him back in jail." Now, I don't know I can't remember right offhand what the reason was for that, but basically his lawyer was playing both sides. He was meeting with him, and Carlito was telling him, "Hey, I want to go straight. I want to buy this club. I want to do this. I want to go down and, rent cars and somewhere else." He was wanting to get completely out of the life, but the lawyer is throwing his name in it for other reasons, more than likely to throw the objective from him from the things that he's doing that's dirty.
He may have been under investigation. He's trying to curry favor with the authorities.
Right. And so that seems like that could be a little bit of what's going on here with that thing. You never know what Tammy what else she had going, and she's using Meech as a diversion.
Yes, but had she been previously involved in trafficking, that would have been more plausible. But when you're talking about someone with no criminal record, no arrests, doesn't come from that world.
Yes.
And quite frankly, Meech wouldn't have trusted anybody from that world with his life rights.
Yeah.
And so that all cuts against Meech. Now, on the other hand, still, we don't have any public confirmation. And I'm sure she's going to lay all of it out with respect to whatever documentary 50 Cent's putting together. I saw another clip online where Cuffy's inviting 50 Cent to come talk to him. And so you have a circumstance, well, they won't let him in. The numerous companies tried to come see me when I was in prison. They won't let the production companies in at all.
Yeah.
And so, but he will, 50 Cent will ultimately be able to take all of that information, put together a documentary where he has to be careful as if Meech wasn't involved.
Then he can sue.
Yes, because now you are undermining his credibility and impacting his ability to go forward, earning a living. And so he had this welcome home concert that they put together. Well, several of the prominent acts have backed out. Well, they're backing out because they don't want to be associated with someone who may have flipped.
Right.
Well, if he didn't flip, now you just cost him X number of dollars in ticket sales. Those are damages that can be sued for. And so we're going to start seeing the legal machinations where people start taking positions because whatever she says, she better be able to back it up. Whereas this guy Cuffy, his circumstances, yeah, he's doing a 27-year sentence, but he didn't get busted for his interactions with the Mexican guy he met through Meech. He got busted in connection with an undercover agent operating out of Memphis.
Yeah. Totally separate case.
Totally separate case. And he's saying, well, the connection is her because she put him in charge with the other informant. So if you think about it logically, she didn't call up Cuffy and say, "Hey, want to sell product?" Because she would have done that for any time during the previous 2 years.
Yeah.
So Cuffy had to have called her and say, "Hey, I need a plug." She doesn't know anybody. So she puts him in contact with the other informant, CS2. CS2 says, "Yeah, I got to connect," and introduces him to the undercover agent.
Now, would she know that CS2 is undercover or providing information? She would know that.
Well, we don't know about that either, because what if she just thought he's some trafficker that she knows?
Game. Yeah, in the game.
He's in the game. Yeah, so we don't know whether she orchestrated that either.
Even though Tammy is not from that world, I think when you're tied to Meech, even on the outside world, that's going to draw the attention of many different people, many walks of life, and probably some that still do dabble in that game for some, to some degree.
She testified, and the DEA agents testified that, there was a lot of interest in Meech's story. And there are individuals who would be in the film who think that they would have a piece of it coming. Like, I understand what Meech is going through because I had similar things as they're negotiating film rights and all that kind of stuff. And so guys who, this is Meech's story. You may be in it, but it's telling his story.
Right.
Like Meech can't put you in his story because you never met the guy.
Right.
But if he was partying with you at a strip club in Atlanta, he's got every right to put you there. He just can't fabricate something. Well, there were a lot of people in Meech's circle who were contacting her to talk about the BMF movie. Well, it's not necessarily the BMF movie. It's the story of Meech and his brother. You guys are just all the filler.
Right.
And so that's the same thing with this guy, Cuffy. Apparently, he's the one who was helping with promoting the rights. Well, think about it. Why is a African-American trafficker in St. Louis? Like, what connections does he have in Hollywood? None.
Yeah.
He's thinking he's going to be part of the projects. It's like, I used to, several of the guys that were involved on the distribution side in my case were associated with Death Row Records. And so there were a few times we were at the recording studios and I see all these guys just hanging out. Like, I'm there for 10 minutes. Pull a little boy aside, boom, negotiate something, and then leave. We're not just hanging out to hang out.
Right.
Well, there's a lot of these guys that are just like wanting to be able to say they were present.
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, and the agent said, hey, look, she kept getting called by people that were associated with Meech who were saying, hey, what's going on with the movie? And so, yes, she, of course, could have numerous contacts who came from his world who weren't necessarily talking to her about their illegal business.
Yeah.
These guys are just posturing, playing the role. Let me call Meech's agent to, find out what's going on. They're playing the big shot role with their fellas. I'm going to be in this movie.
Yeah, it's not an uncommon thing either.
Uncommon thing at all. And so you've got her in a position to say, no, presumably she handed the Cuffy off to CS2 knowing he was an informant. Because she's not in a position to say, oh, I know this cartel guy in Memphis. First of all, there are no cartel guys in Memphis. There's Mexican Americans. There's no cartel guys in Memphis. You crazy? So, but it wouldn't have been credible for her to say, I know a guy. Cuff wouldn't have believed that.
Right.
So she said, well, I know a guy who's one of Meech's buddies. He might know someone.
That's going to validate anybody that you put. When you say, I know a guy who I met through Meech, just saying that, whether Meech knows you're saying it or not, that's going to add credibility to that person because his name was dropped alongside of it. Even though Meech is in prison, doesn't have a damn clue this is being said, no clue his name's being used. It's giving this guy, CS2, now ultimate premium validation.
That's right. And it'd be nothing for CS2 to say, yeah, I was hanging out with the guy in prison. Yeah, we walked the track every day together. The Cuffy was obviously interested in developing a new connection, so he was incentivized to cultivate this relationship.
And that is a recipe for disaster right there. When you're so incentivized to getting a new connect, I don't know what happened to his previous connect, if he lost it, if they went down or whatever, but when you're in that position where you have a steady flow and that flow gets cut off and you're scrambling to find another one, your guard is nowhere near as up as it needs to be to vet and do your due diligence, investigate, research, do whatever you need to do to ensure you're not getting in bed with law enforcement. And probably when he heard the name Big Meech's attachment to this guy's name, he didn't bat an eye. He jumped on it immediately.
Sure. Yeah, because in LA, the overwhelming majority of actual cartel transactions take place in Los Angeles.
Right.
The customers take delivery from the regional distribution centers. Now, large traffickers come to LA all the time. Like I met a lot of guys through girls at the Hollywood Tropicana. But they're around for 2, 3, 4 months before, and you're kind of getting comfortable with the individual. You see how he carries himself, how he spends his money. It's a different dynamic than talk to some chick and she's, oh yeah, I know a guy. Like, come on, man, you're never gonna do that.
Yeah.
The fact that he did that indicates he was, in pretty desperate straits.
What is the status of Keith Cromer? Where is he at right now?
They haven't given any indication what happened. Normally in those circumstances, like in my case, there were 2 corrupt agents on the FBI drug task force. One of them flat out ripping off traffickers,
right,
extorting bribes, compromising investigations by leaking confidential law enforcement information. They normally allow the agents to take what's called a stress disability retirement.
That's such bullshit.
They can attribute the retirement, early retirement, to the stress from the job. So it's work related. So they're going to receive their compensation. They're going to insulate their pensions, and it's not going to call into question the integrity of their actions in any other investigation. Yeah, they're very good at looking out for their own.
Damn right.
And so, yeah, so in that circumstance, every time you see this, numerous cases out west where the agents took quote unquote stress disability retirements. So we don't know whether or not this happened with Cromer, but he was in a bad spot because not only do you have this interactions with her, but they were able to extract from her phone like personal photos.
Right.
So he's saying there was no sexual relationship. He's saying it was intimate, but not physical. Like, come on, man. What are you doing?
Because he took over. Do you know much about the Jack Harvey? He was the agent that originally put all of them in jail, right? You know a lot about Jack Harvey?
No, I think he's the one that retired earlier.
Yeah, he had retired earlier after he was the one that initially made all these arrests.
Made the BMF case.
Yes, the case.
He was a case agent. Okay.
And then he retired, and then that's when Keith Cromer essentially stepped in, and then whatever happened with him and Tammy. That is all very interesting. Was she in a relationship at any point in this time?
We don't have any details about her personal life. And here's the thing about Cromer: he wasn't her handler. She had a separate handler. So she's feeding information to the DEA while sleeping with the handler's supervisor.
Wow.
Which is why the Meech camp is saying, hold on a second. The information she fed was insulating her lover, who was kicking her a couple hundred G's of government money. So like I said, improper financial relationship with an informant, improper sexual relationship.
So essentially this whole thing could be fabricated because he needed an excuse to keep paying her because he liked whatever he was getting on those business deals.
How I got charged for shooting someone that wasn't even shot. But when the agent is driving, they're able to manipulate the investigations.
Right.
So one of the tricks he did is he had her feeding information to other agents in Atlanta. Then information was fed to St. Louis, and the St. Louis agents independently corroborated the information that came from Atlanta, but it's all originating from Cromer. So now he can go to his boss and say, hey, cut my CI as a monthly stipend. She's generating all these leads, confirmation from Memphis, confirmation from Atlanta, confirmation from St. Louis. It's all manufactured.
Riddle me this. What if Cromer was the one that put her in contact with CS2 that led to Cuffy getting arrested in the first place? Is that a possibility?
It's very possible. No, it would have to be. Someone from DEA put her in contact with CS2.
That's right, because that's what I'm sitting here trying to figure. If she's not from that world, if she's not from that life, and she did get asked by Cuffy or hear that he needed a plug, if that was her way of maybe saying, hey, maybe they even had the conversation at some point, we got to justify giving you this money, then we'll feed the small fish over here, feed up Cuffy, serve Cuffy. And then he brings in CS2, says, hey, if you introduce him to him, I'll take it from there. And we can put that Meech has ties to this to give it validity.
Okay, well, here's the thing. You have on August 5th of 2012, Cuffy calls, so Tammy starts receiving calls from Cuffy and from Suarez on August 5th. She reports that information to the DEA. On August 28th, the wiretap comes up and running. So from August 28th on, all the calls are recorded. So that's not subject to dispute what was said.
Right.
Okay. Now on August 5th, she triggered it by reporting the calls. And she says that these two guys are dealing together. Now the DEA goes and pulls their telephone toll records, and it shows that from March to July, there were calls from Cuffy to Suarez. So presumably there was a tie between them two. Otherwise, they wouldn't be talking to each other. So then the DEA says, well, we got statements from her. We got independent corroboration through telephone toll records. The judge grants the wiretap application. But the wiretap application involving a conspiracy allegedly involving Meech, Suarez, and Cuffy results in no arrest. 7 months later, or 6 months later, Cuffy and her are talking. He needs a plug. She puts him in contact with CS2. So the entire takedown was orchestrated by the DEA.
Wow. Yeah, after hearing these facts broken down like this, I can't really see much of anything that implicates Big Meech in having any sort of relationship outside of a business relationship in lieu of his brand and the BMF name. I don't think he was involved in anything along the lines of any sort of narcotics dealings or traffickings or anything like that. And like you said, even if he did get that letter from Cuffy asking, saying, "Hey, what do you know about this?" or whatever, he's not going to respond. He's not an idiot. I mean, at the end of all this, for people that know the long formatted story of BMF, Meech wasn't caught on wiretaps. Meech actually had a good chance at fighting that damn case and walking, but in doing so, he would have sent his brother up the river. Southwest T was the one that was caught on the wiretaps talking. Meech was never caught on wiretaps talking. So Meech is not a dummy by any stretch of the imagination.
And look, if Meech's statements to her keep my name out of this implies he may have felt he was criminally exposed because his buddy from St. Louis met the guy he met in county jail. So obviously Meech put Cuffy and Suarez together. Doesn't mean he said go do trafficking activity together, but that's a reasonable inference.
Yeah.
And of course, the statute of limitations are all passed right now, so this doesn't really matter.
Right.
I mean, even if Meech, he can come out right now and say, yeah, I put them together to, I hooked up Cuffy with Suarez to be a new plug. He doesn't face any criminal charges for it. Like, he's not concerned with criminal exposure at this point.
Right.
But at that point, he'd have been, hey, I'm doing 30 years. I can't catch a case while I'm in prison.
Yeah.
And so that statement is much more ambiguous given those circumstances. Now, of course, our informed speculation can be thrown out the window if she steps forward and says, yes, I did it all because Demetrius told me to go do this. Now you could try to chip away at her credibility, undercut her version of events, but that would be extraordinarily damaging for Big Meech if she comes forward and makes that kind of a statement.
But the thing is, when you come forward and make that kind of a statement at some point, like you said earlier in the episode, you're going to have to be able to back it up. And that's what 50 needs to be aware of when doing this documentary, because let's face it, any sort of paperwork or recorded conversation or something tangible that you can see that without a doubt puts Big Meech in the eyes of cooperation in any stretch, that is big. That is a gold mine, really, to the right people. So, and that's what lends it to me is I can't put a whole lot of thought process into being true because somebody would leak that out. Somebody would get their hands on it. Somebody would leak it out. Somebody would be able to, nobody can keep their mouth shut. This is not 30 years ago when things could be done and have been kept under wraps. Nobody can keep their mouth shut nowadays. And that is what lends me to believe that he had nothing to do with this, or at least nothing on paper wise like that. Because if so, it would have been seen, it would have been documented, it would have been leaked out, or if whoever had it would have leaked it to the highest bidder. And I guarantee you, if 50 Cent knew there was some sort of paper, a legit paper that could be documented and proven that Big Meech cooperated to try to get Cuffy locked up, there is no amount of money he would not pay to have that.
No, and like I said, from August 28th through February 13th, the wiretaps were up. How many phone calls were there between Meech and Tammy? Did he ever say, hey, did you talk to Cuff? Did you get that? Like, there's no expression on Meech's part. Like, where's my cut of the money?
Right.
I mean, look, the government would have charged Meech if he's orchestrating these events from prison.
Especially since he's already in prison. It'd be easy.
It's just, it's the kind of case that would be extraordinary on an agent's resume, essentially, because it's low hanging fruit. And so there are a number of phone calls that were recorded by Meech, from Meech to Tammy, that certainly as on the basis of the public record, don't imply he was involved in the drug activity. And if he's saying, "Hey, what about my sentence reduction?" Well, then he's gonna have a problem.
Yeah.
He's gonna have a problem. But if it doesn't say that, she's gonna have a problem because it's just her saying, "I was doing all of this."
Yeah.
You know, the thing that keeps coming back to me is she had an initial motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what the nature of the relationship between the two of them were. Maybe, maybe he was hitting that before he went to prison and she was in love with him. Like she was going to get her man out, come hell or high water, whatever the hell it was. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know why he trusted her. Like the woman I was in a position to trust was because I'd known her since we were in ninth grade.
Right.
There was a 40-year friendship there, as opposed to, some party girl that was hanging out with you at clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And so there has to be something a little bit more significant, because Meech didn't give the life rights to the wife. He didn't trust anybody in his world. He trusted her. So if you trust her with essentially your financial future and the financial well-being of your family, you would trust her to orchestrate something if it was going to get orchestrated.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so that's why I think that the inferences right now are reasonable in both directions. But when you start seeing a little bit of smoke, the burden isn't on Meech to disprove a negative.
Right. It's on her to prove it.
It's on her to prove. And her statements, in conjunction with whatever circumstantial evidence there is, will ultimately lead to, everyone drawing their inferences.
Well, I think we're going to get some clarity on it sooner rather than later. If 50 is on this case with Tammy in this documentary, I don't think he's going to waste much time putting this together. He's obviously with his own, film studio and everything like that. He'll be able to get this up fairly quickly. Even if he's able to get Cuffy's involvement in this thing in lieu of an interview or whatever. I mean, I don't know if he would be able to get the cameras in there, but obviously he's been able to get his hands on cell phones because he's given numerous interviews from prison on a cellular device.
No, that last one was, you could hear the recording in there.
Yeah.
That's every 5 minutes you'll have that call, that break in the prison.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. Oh, okay. All right. So he's on the prison.
That's the notice, like you're talking to a federal.
I said, I got a buddy right now. He's doing 6 months in a Georgia jail, and I hadn't heard from him in a while. I was able to text him on an app for a little bit when he was in a county jail. And then when they moved him, I couldn't text him anymore. The account was shut down. And his girlfriend, whom I stay in contact with, she was like, yeah, he hadn't got that. You can't text him on that thing anymore. And then like 2 weeks ago, he pops back up on Facebook and he sends me a message. I'm like, what the hell's going on? I was like, I thought somebody hacked your account. He's like, nope, got a phone. And I'm like, really? And so he's paying, I think he pays $25 a week for 2 hours a day for the phone for 7 days, which isn't horrible, I don't think. Yeah. So he's been able to communicate with me and send me videos back and forth throughout there. And I said, man, I bet that's like the greatest thing ever, just to have those 2 hours. I look forward to that all day.
Yeah. Yeah. The guy, most of the time they're just well, you have to be very careful.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want that around me. I was like getting close to getting released.
Yeah.
Cause I just don't trust anybody. What if they intercept the phone? They're going to pull every number.
Yeah.
Like if your mom's phone number appears on some guy's cell phone.
Yeah. And they're going to, yeah. And I don't know if he's calling anybody. He's just messaging me through Facebook.
So, yeah. But I think that once Meech realizes that either she has control over the life rights and he can't get them back, or even worse, 50 Cent has them and he can't get them back. At that point, he needs to start thinking, as far as going forward, look, there's a big opportunity for him to do speaking engagements.
Yes.
But it can't be from a position of advocating on behalf of traffickers.
Right.
Like I don't advocate on behalf of trafficking or diminish its seriousness. On the other hand, I don't buy into all the platitudes and the statement. My version of the events is I try to bring more of an insider's perspective to circumstances that are oftentimes uninformed, unbalanced, or disingenuous.
Right.
Like, I don't follow the party line. Like, this is how it really works.
Right.
And I think someone with his name recognition would be incredibly impactful. Like I said, I'm good friends with the guy from African American trafficker who put up the money for Death Row Records. Like, I see him at Trump's inauguration. I see him at White House parties now. And same thing.
What's
Like
that guy's name?
Meech,
What's his name?
Harry-O.
Harry O. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael Harris. I think Meech can go that route, but that means shedding the the cool guy posturing persona. Now, if you want to, if that's who you are, that's who you are. That's fine, but that's not going to be commercially viable.
Right. And that kind of that's a cross he's going to have to bear soon, because I mean, obviously there's people out there who'll probably pay him top dollar for an interview. Hadn't done an interview yet. I would imagine all the big podcasters are probably clamoring for him to come on and do an interview. And even though with him doing that much stretching time in prison, you wonder how much he'll say, how much he'll even offer. That'd be an interesting take, because you have a guy like Joey Merlino in Philly who's building his whole platform and reputation off, the platforming of we don't rat and we're pushing back against all the people that do cooperate. But with that, you can only say so much, because let's be honest, everybody knows Joey was involved in some shit in Philly. He's going to deny that. And I understand why he's got to do it. It makes perfect sense, but you're not going to be able to get further information out of Joey about things that you want to ask him. You can't, because he hasn't cooperated. He never will cooperate, I don't think. So you're not going to be able to get the information you really want to know, which is a huge point in my show, because I've had some cooperators on before in the past. Cooperators is where you're going to get the information. When you have someone that hasn't cooperated, you're limited to what you can get. So it's like the show value really isn't there. You got a guy that's, he's a man's man. He hasn't never told, you got all the good things, the good qualities you want in a guy, but the entertainment factor is not going to be there for you.
Sure. No, I think you're certainly right. There would be a tremendous swell of interest at the outset. For Meech, he can make the rounds, realistically. But the problem for him is he doesn't get released from prison until January of 26. So, he and I were in a similar circumstance that for that first 15 months out, I was in prison. Like, I couldn't go more than X number of miles from the halfway house. And so for him, I've been invited to appear on podcasts all over the country. Well, I still can't travel.
Yeah.
And so his ability is going to be limited to be able to monetize his story prior to the documentary. So, if a podcast host wants to come to Miami, that's different. However, as far as him being able to travel, that's just not happening.
Yeah. Well, in most cases too, like Vlad is hardly ever in the same spot as his interviewers, unless they're in LA. He will set up a studio and then they will go and interview via studio. They'll have it all set up, and that's typically how it is. And I think Matt was like that in the case, because Vlad is based out of LA. So, I mean, that would probably definitely be something that could be done there if he even wants to do that. I mean, he could be holding off. He could be, that's another opportunity. He could start his own podcast if that's something that he's even interested in doing. I mean, those avenues right there can be a lot of income streams if you break that down into BMF secrets. But again, how much would he be willing to talk about and give away? Because if you kept your mouth shut and you've done almost 20 years, now you get out and tell everything. That's is that defeating the purpose? Is it, is it hypocritical? How do you?
He did his time.
Yeah.
And the people he protected presumably didn't do anything for him, or otherwise he wouldn't be hanging out with Ross.
Right.
For whatever chump change Ross has given him.
Yeah.
So, okay, he did his time. He didn't cross nobody out. It's his turn to monetize the story.
And I agree with that.
And so if he had put this way, when we have our discussions where I go on other podcasts, I don't discuss anything that's not already publicly known.
Right.
Like, you wouldn't expect Meech to throw some guy, he's going to respect privacy, but if it's public information, it's his turn to monetize the story. That's just not unreasonable. And so I think that, yes, a podcast for him would be interesting. Also a podcast, him going on to guests, but that's a 3 or 4 month blitz.
Yeah.
Like, we don't know what his forfeitures are. The government's going to take a big chunk of the money. Presumably he has a fine. Presumably he has forfeitures. And so you start seeing, even if it's multiple six figures, the government's going to take a good chunk of it. Yeah. So going forward, once you exhaust that income stream, he has to come up with a new business model. And so long as 50 Cent or Tammy Cowins has control of the life rights, he can't monetize the story. Now, it can't preclude him from sharing his life experiences, which would why he'd be a great, speaker. But you're not going to get hired either. I've been invited to speak before law enforcement groups. Well, they don't want to hear you come in and be thug.
Right. You got to change it up depending on.
This is how I structured it. Like, I'm not telling you who's doing anything now. He's been down for 20 years. He doesn't know who's doing anything.
Right.
But historically, this is how we were structuring it.
Yeah, you come on and you say just how you did it. You can't do it with that bravado or whatever. I mean, like, you take a guy like Sammy the Bull, was the number 2 guy in the Gambinos. He was the underboss, essentially kind of pulled the card out that collapsed the whole, mafia. Everybody started cooperating after that. But now if you look on his Instagram, he's taking pictures and smiling with cops. He's holding babies. He's playing golf, like at some kind of charity event golf game. Like, he's completely redid his image, and, people are going to still think what they think. I mean, at the end of the day, yeah, he committed 19 murders, but you can rebrand your image in the way you tell it and the way you deliver the story. So that'll be something to be said of how he approaches that, because he has a couple different avenues he can use to do that. But I think if he sits down, and maybe it's a good thing that he's waiting, and somebody has a conversation with him, you need to look at longevity with this. What can you do for the long term?
Sure. And like I said, that's going to turn on this, whether or not he's able to get out from underneath that contract. If he's not, then he has to develop a commercially viable longer term plan. And I believe, once he gets out of prison, then he can get permission from his supervised release officer to contact Harry O.
Right.
Or contact Jay Flores. These are guys, Harry O didn't cooperate, but he's heavily involved in his community's projects, essentially. Whereas Jay Flores did cooperate, and he does speaking engagements all over the country. And so there's companies that would jump at the opportunity to bring Meech on board once he realizes that commercially this is going to be his only play.
Yeah. And I think he's probably already been dealing with those situations or dealing with those thought processes, because if you take now, he can spin this whole thing as, look, this is what I did. How can I help keep kids off the streets, but at the same time send the message of how he did it? So it's interesting to the people that know the history, but you're still having the spin of, at the end of the day, I did all this, but look what happened. I did 20 years in jail.
Well, that's how you pitch it to the younger guys. Yeah. I've spoken before the, younger guys in their 20s.
Yeah.
And from their perspective, look, young guys are young guys. They fast cars, fast money, fast women. And so you have that conversation with them on the front end. You entertain them. You go along with some of the bullshit stories. But then you turn it into a much more serious level, because now you're able to say, hey, look, it wasn't worth the 30-year sentence.
Right.
Like, I did 26 years. And you're not there to bury your father or to comfort your mother or to bury your brother. And so those are the stories that they have to understand, that, sure, you may have a 7-8 year run, like in my case, a 10 or 15-year run, like in Meech's. He still got a 30 piece. And the only reason why he got out was because the Sentencing Commission changed the guidelines and made a retroactive change where traffickers were able to get a 2-level reduction. And so Meech did receive a sentence reduction, but it wasn't cooperation based.
Right.
It was a change in how weights are attributed. And so instead of being a level 38, he now became a level 36. Well, I was in the 40s. Nothing changed, helped me.
Yeah.
Whereas he was able to catch that break. And so, he's already out much sooner than he otherwise would have been. And so he can make that pitch credibly to the younger guys particularly because there are a lot of community groups where they'd be interested in having him make a positive spin without being disingenuous. Like, yeah, there's a lot of good to it, but you have to weigh the cars, the women, the money against the consequences. And whatever short-term benefit there are greatly outweighed by the 30-year sentence you're looking at.
Yeah.
Particularly because when I spoke with guys, it was guys that were already prior convictions. Like the guys in prison already all have one conviction. So on your second conviction, it's a mandatory minimum 20. Well, they have to understand that. And so I think Meech is in a credible position, which is why he was so panicking with, hey, keep my name out of this thing.
Right. I think we're going to get some answers within the next year. I think a lot's going to be clear. I think the documentary that 50's doing will probably come out within that time when he gets fully released or off his house. However, what is he classified as? Home confinement, or what is that classified?
Well, he's at the halfway house. Now, whether he's still an in-house resident or out custody resident, I don't know his particular status.
Okay.
But if you're at the halfway house, you still get like 48-hour passes to go home on weekends.
Okay. So I still think a lot of it will be resolved over the next year. I think it's going to be interesting that people need to kind of keep their eyes on this thing because, who knows? I mean, we could be wind up getting a story from Meech's side for this whole thing. There's a lot left to be said, and he can play it that way too.
Yeah, well, like that's another way for Meech to be able to capitalize on the story because now he's not telling the BMF story. He's telling the story of how Tammy screwed him over.
Right.
Or how Tammy played the DEA or Tammy played 50 Cent. Like someone's getting played. Mm-hmm. We haven't determined who that's going to be the big reveal.
Yeah. Well, Pete, I appreciate you coming on and breaking all this down for it, man. I know it's a hot topic right now, so I definitely appreciate your time. And I tell you what, I'm very intrigued to see how this plays out.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for this episode of Crime and Entertainment. Pete, we'll see you next week, my friend.
Have a good. Bye-bye.